I gave him my urine. When I went to the office, they tell me I'm positive, I was smoking tar.
He and 3 others tested positive for cannabis at school and ended up being detained in prison-like facilities for 77 days.
When they tested him, I was not there. And then they told me that I must take him to a police station on Monday.
Did the punishment fit the crime?
You cannot impose onerous conditions on a child for a Schedule 1 offence, which is what we're currently dealing with.
Checkpoint investigates Dagga detention. The 18th of September 2018 was a historic day in South Africa. Cannabis was decriminalized in the Constitutional Court. The judges made it clear that the ruling applied to adults only.
Section 4B of the Drugs Act is unconstitutional and therefore invalid to the extent that it prohibits the use or possession of cannabis by an adult in private for that adult's personal consumption in private.
So what happens when children are found using? An incident that occurred in May last year at Pro Practicum Vocational School in Mogale City, west of Johannesburg, has taken the issue back to the courts, this time specifically focusing on Dagga smoking minors. Mapaseka's son, whose identity we are concealing, is on medication that has to be taken after food. In May last year, he bought a cookie at school to eat before taking his pill.
When I get there at school, I saw selling cookies. I asked him a cookie so that I can eat, so that I can go and take my pill. I ate my half, he ate his half. I went to go and take my pill.
He says he wasn't aware it was laced with cannabis. A fellow learner reported him.
That boy, I tells one of the social workers who I'm smoking. I asked the social worker, have you seen me smoke, or have you seen me smelling funny cigarette or weed, or he said no.
The school conducted a urine test.
When I went to the office, they tell me I'm positive, I was smoking tar.
When they tested him, I was not there. And then they told me that I must take him to prison, to a police station on Monday.
EFF Krugersdorp branch member Bianca Lee Grosset took interest in the matter of the 4 boys who tested positive for marijuana.
He said that he'd had the urine test, that they hadn't put gloves on, they hadn't opened the box in front of him.
No one has ever given me that test. I've never seen them. I just heard from them that he tested positive.
The school allegedly insisted he go see a specific police officer at Krugersdorp, SAPS, Fritz Terblanche, who's the chairman of the school governing body.
He's in the school magazine. He works hand in hand with the school. So I'm also puzzled that is the school paying him or he's doing it voluntarily?
Sergeant Terblanche wasn't permitted to speak to us, but police spokesperson Captain K. Makubela says Terblanche's involvement was above board.
What we normally have from the police side, we have an officer who is adopting a school. We call it adopt a cop. And that adopt a cop, he interacts with the school or certain schools around the area for any problems.
But Bianca says their experience at the police station amounted to little more than scare tactics.
They've opened a case against the child, which is mind-boggling on all levels, because you cannot charge a child off a urine test.
We spoke to Schindler's attorneys, who have a unit specifically dedicated to cannabis-related matters.
You need a reasonable suspicion in order to perform testing. Once the testing is done and you find that the person has tested positive, you may not subject them to the criminal procedure or the criminal justice system.
The Department of Education says the school should have taken disciplinary action in line with the South African Schools Act.
that the disciplinary measures wasn't followed. Why is that? That we'd need to understand, so an investigation would assist in that regard.
On the charge sheet, Sergeant Terblanche wrote diversion program, essentially rehabilitation.
In terms of the regulations, there are very particular sets of things that should be present for a diversion program to be really accredited and to be recognized by court.
Also very interesting to note that the diversion program has been started and is run by the state prosecutor.
I signed for the drug program. The reason why I signed for that one, I thought maybe I'm going to warn him about how drugs can be harmful. Later did I know that it's a way, that signature, it will put him to prison.
Charmaine Badenhorst is the Director for Child Justice and Family Law at the Justice Department. She says the boys should have been assessed.
Every child must be assessed by a probation officer who will then give the court information about the child's circumstances, the child's development, the child's maturity, the child's background, and the child's history.
On the 9th of October, Social Development stepped in.
He did miss one of the community sessions or two of the community sessions on a Saturday, which I believe then impacted quite severely on the end of the program.
I didn't attend. They don't understand when I say I don't have taxi fee. So I didn't attend. So I'm always banking.
Coming towards the end of the program, they then sat down with a parole officer that he hadn't met before. They had a long chat with her. She was quite adamant that the child had failed due to the school reports of his behaviour, of being late for class or being inattentive or not having a pen. And you think I'm making them up. Those are really what they're complaining about the kid doing. And then they sentenced him to 6 months at a Bosasa facility.
The diversion principles correspond with the Child Justice Act. And in terms of the Child Justice Act, you cannot impose onerous conditions on a child for a Schedule 1 offence, which is what we're currently dealing with.
The police take a much narrower view.
Once a child is subjected to criminal activity, that particular child have to be taken through the process of court.
I don't think that was the intention of the legislature. If a child is referred to a child and youth care centre, in terms of the legislation, that is envisaged for children that commit Schedule 2 or 3 offences.
Using cannabis is a Schedule 1 offence. Schedule 2 and 3 are more serious and violent crimes like armed robbery, theft, murder and rape.
The best way to teach a learner is not to send a learner deeper into the system, into court, into prison.
What are the charges? He said no, it's because they ate space cookies, Dagga, for using Dagga. They never found Dagga for them to send them to prison.
Disturbingly, the charges had been changed too, says Bianca.
So the document to appear in court said use or possession and diversion program. Then the document, the J88, said that the child was appearing in court for dealing in a substance, a dependence-producing substance, and had ecstasy behind it.
Sergeant Terblanche's name appears on the charge sheet.
The learner, to the best of our knowledge, was tested positive for Dagga. Not dealing. So that's to the best of our knowledge what should have been dealt with.
We were eating a space cookie and now we're dealing ecstasy. Kind of think they might have the wrong kid, but the same thing happened with all 4 of the children.
Nothing was found on him. A urine test was done, which only proved that at some point in the last few weeks he'd used marijuana. How could that charge become dealing in a court?
That's upon the court. The court can answer better for that one. That how did they come to that point to say this child is dealing with Dagga or dealing with drugs. So for the police, it's when we found you in position and when we found you dealing, and we arrest you for that. So if the courts, as we are explaining, have found the child was not found in position of marijuana or whatever, but they charge the child with dealing in drugs, and then the court will have to explain to you what made them to come to that decision.
This left Mapaseka with many unanswered questions, and she also wonders why the social worker misrepresented what the diversion program would involve.
He started motivating those three. No, as you are going, there'll be courses, there'll be swimming you're going to do, they're going to equip you with skills. So I felt, no, Mara, for this November, until before Christmas, for children to be there, they will acquire skill. He was talking as if it's a nice place for kids, sort of a camp, you know.
On the 21st of November, the 4 young boys were taken to this Dagga detention center near Mogale City.
As they are going, said, one of the officers said, when you get there, they are going to rape you inside.
That man in the car, he was telling me nonsense. He said they're gonna rape us. There is big children in there. Me, I thought that man is playing. When I get in there, the children, they were doing the very same thing that, hey, we are gonna rape you, stones us. Now there is a say, the care worker. He was telling us, oh no, don't worry, they'll never do anything. Calming us down, Mary. Still, it was not the same. The children, they were still threatening us.
Next, allegations of strangulation and assault.
Same guy who hit him on Friday, he hit him again, this time to such an extent that his face was swollen and he has some bruises.